So we're going to cover a couple of basic topics on the things you're going to want to think of when you're building a computer, because obviously a computer can do many different things, and some of the things you're going to want to keep in mind are things like your budget, aesthetics, form factor, or usage, because if you didn't already know, building a server is quite different than a workstation or a gaming platform, and each of these are going to need certain things. Now, because we're here streaming at Twitch and we're also here at PAX East, you guys are obviously gamers, right? Yeah. That's what we thought. So therefore, we're going to basically keep this honed into gaming as the workload, so gaming-based systems, right? So we actually have some components here. We're going to go over them in a little bit, kind of as we go down the line of the topics. And we have a massive chassis over there, courtesy of ThermalTake. We'll get into that in a little bit. But bottom line is that because gaming is our workload, I'm going to actually start with you, JJ. Now, actually, we should introduce everybody. What am I doing? I'm so excited to tell you guys information. I'm Steve from Newegg, by the way. Thank you very much. The three people from Newegg are very excited. But to my left, I actually have some amazing gentlemen and experts in the field. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and actually tell you guys a little bit about them. Why don't we start with you, JJ?
Thank you, Steve. So, first and foremost, once again, thanks, guys, for coming out. We really appreciate it, guys and girls. It's awesome to, guys, have you here, have the opportunity to actually talk about the state of hardware and building a PC, because that's what we're doing here. We're experiencing all this awesome content in games, but definitely we want that hardware experience to be able to enable that. So for me, I work for ASUS, so we are the world's largest motherboard manufacturer, graphic card manufacturer, and we make boatloads of other hardware, as you guys probably know. I work for ASUS in the capacity to reach out to you guys, support you guys, help you guys understand our product, engage with you guys, and take the feedback so that we can make ultimately better product for you guys. And we do that through a new initiative we have with PC DIY. So I'm very happy to be here and give you guys some insight.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Matthew.
Hey everyone, I'm Matthew Letts. I'm desktop technical marketing, representing Intel. I own our presence in most of the booths at the recent PAX events and BlizzCon and other gaming events. So all the desktop-related demos you see in the events are coming from us, and we try and make sure they're fun and entertaining for you guys.
Awesome.
We also try and make sure our lines are shorter than like the Oculus lines or the Dreadnought lines, so you get to play some of the same cool games. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about the different CPUs and how they can fit into your gaming needs and answer your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. And Shannon.
Hi guys, I'm Shannon. I like long walks across the map in Dota and the occasional drink of a health potion, but otherwise I work marketing at ThermalTake, and also I work with our design team to make really cool stuff like this for you guys so that you guys can enjoy better gaming and just have, awesome times building really cool PCs.
Awesome. Thank you. Bob, take it away.
All right, I'm Bob. I'm from kbmod.com, and we manufacture absolutely nothing except for awesome. We're a PC gaming community. We focus on live stream content on Twitch. Yeah, I'm an IT professional by trade and an enthusiast by choice, so here I am.
I like that. I like that.
Awesome.
Why didn't you use it before so I could use it?
Thank you. All right, guys, so let's jump into gaming systems, and first and foremost, being that gaming is the actual workload that the computer is going to be doing. JJ, I'm going to refer to you. What would you say is the sort of the defining factor of what would define a gaming system and its workload?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting question. A lot of us, when we go about considering, do we build a system, what do we want to build a system for? Some of us kind of reach straight for maybe form factor, right? Or we reach straight towards a certain price point. But actually the most important thing a lot of us overlook is actually maybe your monitor resolution.
Right.
The reason why is that your resolution is going to define a large part of the system specification. If you know you're going to be playing predominantly, let's say, mobile-oriented titles at 1080p, you already can outline a huge amount of the system in terms of what you're looking at from a performance standpoint. Yep. But a lot of times we tend to go and look at every single other specification before we look at really the usage, right? What we're specifically going to do. Right. And whether you already own that hardware or whether you're going to be owning that hardware at a later stage, that's definitely going to be a key part. And you also want to be really open to that whole question of the monitor. It doesn't necessarily just mean traditional monitors, right? We're entering in a whole area as was noted by Matthew in terms of VR. That's a monitor technically. You've got resolution considerations. If you're stepping into multi-monitor considerations, you've got really big spanned resolutions that you have to factor in. All of those are going to ultimately define a lot of the key choices you're going to make in the biggest budget portions, which will probably be your CPU and your graphics card.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you take into consideration the refresh rate of a monitor. Right?
Yeah,
so 120 hertz, 144 hertz, you're going to want to be able to push 144 frames a second at a minimum. If you really want to see it working at its best. So the potential is there. I do want to mention too that form factor, obviously, sizes and chipset and functionality are all going to play a role as well. So maybe we should talk a little bit about motherboards, JJ.
So when you kind of consider the landscape of what you have to pick, one of the great things that we have in kind of this, I think, current state and age, and it's really been enabled by the advancements that we've seen on the CPU side, for one, is that form factor no longer dictates a large delta in performance, right? We're in an era where you can have amazing performance in really small form factor systems, and you can have ultra large systems that are even larger than that, right? That are enabling even greater levels of experience. But fundamentally, the best experiences can be had across everything from the smallest size boards like mini ITX to micro to traditional ATX to big dual socket boards. It's a really great position to be in because it means you guys, as gamers, you have the most flexibility at picking whatever you want. The trickier part's going to be is what are the other considerations that you're going to have? Are you going to be caring about the noise output of the system? Do you want it to be more compact for a certain type of area? And also, even when you pick the board and the chipset, there's going to be limitations. Not every chipset, which has certain features, is going to exist in every form factor, and that's something that isn't always understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you have an example of a motherboard right in front of you right now. If you want to give them, we can talk a little bit more about it while you're showing that. In terms of form factor, we're looking at extended ATX. Okay, perfect. And Bob, I think you might have something else to offer in terms of portability. If you go with a smaller form factor, and we're talking about gaming, then really you could essentially make a system that's much smaller, much more portable, at least in the sense of being able to bring it out.
Does anybody here attend LANs? Hands up.
Really? That's you?
That's
I
all?
thought really a lot more people would be going to LANs. Okay.
Okay. Well, my group, we frequently do LANs, and let me tell you, it's not fun lugging around my Corsair 500R. It's a really, it's on the larger end of the mid-tower cases. And the ITX platform is really attractive to me based on the fact that I'd like to be able to move my machine around a lot. Might not be for everybody, but the flexibility that we have in the PC landscape now is just amazing.
Yeah, but you also want to consider too, in that same regard, going small form factor, it's going to be great. You're not getting any diminishing returns overall in terms of the performance, the GPUs that you can have enabled on the platform, but are you considering expansion? There's a lot of us, sometimes when we're building systems or we're considering it, we project this mentality that we think we know what we're going to do in 6 months. A lot of times that doesn't happen. We tell ourselves, I'm going to put in that second graphics card. I'm going to put in more memory. I'm going to put in X and X number thing. And you have to be conscious that that may happen. It may not happen, but your form factor is going to define a lot of that. And you have to keep that in mind. Of course, the smaller system you go, you mean more you're constrained. But of course, a larger system, you're going to be able to enable that. And that's definitely something you have to be conscious of if you're looking at maybe integrating 2 graphics cards versus going only with a single or an integrated based solution. So that's another factor there.
Yeah, absolutely. So something we always want to talk about too, aside from the form factor of the motherboard, is actually form factor of chassis. So Shannon, you like chassis?
Yeah, I like a few of them. We tend to make them. So honestly, when it comes down to it, you really do have to consider not just, obviously maybe you want a really portable LAN rig, but you also have to consider that maybe the smallest chassis might not be the best choice for you because maybe you have specific cooling needs. You want to put a high-end graphics card in there. You want to put in a high-end power supply. Not everything's going to fit it. I'm not saying everyone needs, a monster that fits, a ton of radiators or anything like that and everything, but at the end of the day, you want to look at what your real needs are going to be, because if you're playing high-end games, let's say Battlefield or something that pulls a ton of GPU power, then you're going to be producing some heat, and you got to have a way to get it out. Whether you're talking water cooling or high-end air cooling or just a lot of chassis airflow, all that stuff makes a really big difference as to how you want to imagine your build before you ever even start buying parts.
Yeah.
And I think to Shannon's point also, I'm a bigger guy, I'm 6'2", I've got really big hands. there's little things that sometimes you don't remember as a builder that is totally going to affect your experience, and you want to be conscious of it. It seems silly, but when I put my hands inside of certain size chassis, I realize I have no way to be able to navigate around there. I've got no way that I can run my cable lead this way, or I'm cutting my hands, because some chassis that are cheaper, they might not have rounded edges. It seems really silly, but you're going to look at all these specs, and you're maybe never even going to think about this, because all you're going to think about is, can I fit this number of fans? Can I fit this number of hard drives? Does it fit this size graphics card? But having the ability to work with a chassis comfortably, knowing that it's got removable fan filters. You'd be surprised how many of those things later on you're gonna wish, oh, had I spent 10 more bucks here, or had I thought about that, it would have made so much of a bigger difference, because nobody wants to spend time to put everything together and then 3 months later take it all back out to go into something else.
So I'm going to bring it back to gaming then about chassis. So obviously if you needed to be able to bring a computer to a location, it needs to be a little bit smaller. But if you lived in a dorm, then you really don't have a lot of space on hand. So really you're trying to build a smaller system versus living somewhere else where you have a ton of room, or if you're making it for an office or something like that you shouldn't be gaming on, but because you control which systems you buy for the office, they could game. But moving forward from motherboards and chassis and the form factor idea in general, I think we should be talking about a little bit more about functionality of motherboards. And just a quick note, guys, this might seem really technical. Really, we just want to touch on some of the things we feel like a lot of builders or new builders haven't really thought of. And we want to try and impart some of this knowledge to you to hopefully do the research on your own and find what would actually fit what you need your system to be able to do.
So I think getting into functionality. Yeah. So this is one of the craziest things. I mean, tons of people. I mean, it's probably like, I get it, of course, because I work for a motherboard manufacturer. Right. Everybody always has a question, what's the right motherboard to buy? It's like you guys have 4 boards, they're all the same price band, and I don't know which one to pick. And it's really hard because you have a lot of things to consider. We talked about earlier aesthetics. Aesthetics is a growing aspect, and now when you build your own system, it's one of the best reasons why to build your own system. You can have it look and feel however you want, but at the same time, you have to be cognizant and aware that, you know, if you want a board that gives you the ability to do 2 or 3 graphics cards, that might be limited to a certain chipset or a certain platform, right? If you want to be able to have much higher memory densities, then you also need to specifically consider that as well. But I think the biggest thing is we're in a technical field overall building something. One of the hardest things to get trapped in is spec. And most important thing I think for me that I want to convey is spec doesn't equal experience. And what I mean by that is just in a general example, if we take a look like at a board like this, and you could have it be really any motherboard that you would want. Let's say, look at something arbitrary like the number of fan headers that you might see on a motherboard. When you guys buy the chassis, you might think, okay, it's got 4 fan headers, right? And I've got 4 fan, mounts in my chassis. Are you asking yourself, can I actually control all those fans? Probably not. And you won't realize that until you actually go and install it, and then you find out that 2 or 3 of those fans are always running at a really high speed, and it's louder than you ever thought. And you never thought. Why? Because the spec doesn't define the experience. Now that could be a big difference between one board, let's say that's $140, and another board that might be $90, or it could be $110. Sometimes it might be a $10 difference, but you gotta realize that that spec doesn't always tell you exactly what the experience is gonna be. One other big one too would probably be, think about long-term support. A lot of us don't think about the product after the fact when you buy it, but things like BIOS updates or software updates, just like some of you guys, probably everybody here have a smartphone? Raise your hands. Okay, and probably when a new update comes out, you want to get that update, right? Because you want more functionality, and if your vendor probably doesn't give you your update, you're probably not really happy, right? It's actually the same thing. You'd be surprised how many boards can delineate updates over time, and that's a value proposition to you. How do you add a dollar value to that? I don't know. It's very hard. But does it have value to you? I would say yes. Me, I care about knowing that the vendor's putting in after the fact support so that more memory supported, different types of devices are supported. Shannon's a power user. He loves different types of expansion peripherals. Not every board, even though it has that slot, is going to make that work.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because I use a lot of RAID cards and things like that. And one thing is like you get a specific board like ASUS has WS workstation boards. Right. I love it because things like large RAID cards, I've had boards before that wouldn't even post just because they didn't have the right option ROM space. So therefore, by knowing that they have that kind of compatibility and it's tested with that kind of stuff, it makes a big difference for my overall experience because I know I plug it in, it's just going to work.
Excellent. All right, guys, I think I should move us along to CPUs. Obviously, we can talk a little bit about overclocking here too, but maybe we should kind of preface this with. Actually, I want to know how many people here have overclocked a CPU. This is really good. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So, right, more than what we expected. So, overclocking a lot of times can actually come down to your comfortability of what people are afraid of damaging their hardware. And I myself, I think I can speak for all of us here. We all enjoy overclocking as well. Get a little bit more performance. You know, you have to have some supporting mods for that too, supporting hardware, cooling, and K-SKUs and whatnot. Speaking of Intel CPUs, but yeah, bottom line is I think it comes down to comfortability.
Yeah, I think the barrier to entry in that space has been lowered quite a bit, both from process changes as well as, changes in motherboard, BIOS, firmware, software available, JJ, do you want to talk a little bit about what?
Sure, but I don't know if Matt has any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, the big fear is always damaging your $1,000 plus or minus processor.
Right.
But I think a lot of work's been done on the BIOS side to make that a lot more user-friendly. So when you can go in, you can just select auto and it'll just automatically do it on its own. Or if you want to go in and start tweaking options, the options are there and it kind of explains what they are. If you get like XMP memory, it kind of just goes and does it on its own as well.
Yep.
So that helps alleviate a lot of the fears. And then if you want to try to go for those big numbers, you can go for those big numbers. And then on the boards themselves, there's a lot of little recovery buttons and options and tricks you can do. So if you do brick your board, you can still kind of get back out of it.
I think it's important when you look at those CPU selection as a whole, make sure to consider that the CPU, I mean, Intel has evolved a huge amount of work in the CPU. They're not what they were 5 years ago. You've got memory controller built in. You have platform dependencies built in. So a lot of times that's giving you your number of PCI Express lanes that you have for all the expansion that you're doing. Are you thinking about that? Do you realize that if I have a CPU that has more lanes, I can put in more cards, right? Most of us usually think about frequency and the number of cores, right? And then it usually comes down to a value proposition. How much frequency do I need? How many cores do I need? I think the great thing, though, is that from a gaming standpoint, when you go back to that original question we talked about what game and what resolution you play at, that's going to push you towards probably the CPU that makes sense. And, everybody's got their relative opinion on value and how much to spend, but definitely there's a truth that if you overbuy on the CPU, it's never going to hurt you. If you actually go with 2 entry of a CPU, it can inhibit your performance. It does definitely affect performance.
Yeah.
But, there's been strides, where you have a lot of value in, new SKUs like the Pentium Anniversary. It's a very cheap chip. It's an unlocked chip. And, overclocking it can net you, 20 extra frames with a good graphics card. So you have a lot of flexibility at this time, but definitely, you need to be conscious of the platform. And even things like overclocking, remember that you need the right chipset. If you're not buying into at least a performance-oriented chipset, you won't have that functionality.
And since we are talking about gaming, I think it's fairly important too to mention that if you already know which types of games you're going to be playing at, and obviously which resolutions, which is what you should have been starting with, then you can look up the recommended hardware for that particular game. And that's important because people don't actually do that. They just say, all right, what's the best thing I should get? And they ask their friend, they ask their tech friend. I'm sure there's some of those tech friends in this room right now. You are the go-to advice person, but the reality is that everybody could look this information up. Just go look up every single website of the game that you like to play, and you're going to know more information about it right there. But aside from that, I think it's probably important to mention that games are moving forward. They're using more cores now. So buying a dual-core gaming system, probably not the best bet. You're going to want to go with something like a quad-core at the minimum, right?
Yeah.
Oh, just let me sit out there, Intel guy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding, Matthew. All right, so you did mention the fact that CPUs can be, or we did speak on the fact that CPUs can be overclocked. I think it's important, too, to talk about the fact that it's sort of a lottery, right? I mean, each chip is different, and so its overclockability will be inherently different, especially because the memory controller is built into that. That's also going to affect your ability to overclock memory or run faster memory. But let's kind of rehash that really quick, and then we can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to remember it's a silicon lottery. Intel's done a fantastic job, I think, to create more consistency and overclocking on the parts that have it available. And we're seeing really healthy, consistent margins in terms of what the parts have available to them. Right. But, you could have your friend and you build the same exact 100% system, everything down to the T, and one of you guys can get one result, and, the other guy can get an entirely different result. And that's the reality of it, Now, what you might have in terms of the setups that you have to streamline that process, it can also be a big factor. You know, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool enthusiast, a bleeding-edge guy, so I'm going to build literally every chipset launch. Some of you guys
Wow.
might build every, you know, three years. Some of you might be every 5 years. Some of you might be every 6+ years. The tricky part about that is stuff changes over time. There's tons and tons of stuff. If you don't want to be cognizant of that, you don't want to have to learn about all that, it makes more sense that the board or the product you buy into can have technologies built in to automate this. And we're working with the latest generation chips from Intel so that you can, at a click of a button, specific to your cooler, to your CPU, it can automatically enable an overclock that's tuned to you.
I'm still reeling over the fact that you're just going to sit around building computers. I really, that's like my favorite part of my job. So the fact that every time something comes out, you're going to build it for every single motherboard, of course, that makes perfect sense, obviously, working for ASUS. But I thought I'd just kind of ring that in again. So, all right, so memory controller, obviously, in part of the CPU, but moving forward to that would actually depict which memory type, right? Because you've already selected the platform, which has sort of locked you into a certain CPU, which has also locked you into a certain type of memory. So moving forward from that, I think probably DDR3 and DDR4 being the two most common memory types that you're going to see out there right now. In terms of gaming, will you see a massive difference between the two? It's probably debatable. But besides that, knowing what you need to purchase is another important step. And knowing which system you're going to have to go with is also important too. Because most of the time you guys are probably going to build a gaming system that does more than just gaming. But streaming can be done with an i5 processor using QuickSync. So you don't need to go i7, and you're probably thinking, this guy's crazy. What is he talking about? Intel's going to kill him because he wants to sell all i7s. But no, honestly, the reality is absolutely. Right, Bob? I mean, what do you guys do at KB Mod?
Yeah, I mean, you can also augment it with things like a live gamer. You know, those are available. They're not too expensive either, and they help quite a bit. We built a little streaming PC for our LAN events that just has an i5, 3 live gamers, and it does a great job.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Fantastic.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
think
go ahead.
one last point on the memory. You know, Matt talked about XMP. One thing that's kind of confusing out there is how many people actually know what XMP is even here? By show of hands.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so that's a really good topic, right? So, you know, memory is kind of this thing that you put in your computer. Everybody knows I need memory and I need more memory, but there's always that debate, how much memory do I put in my system? And kind of one thing that you do want to keep in mind is that we work really, really closely with all these memory partners. You know, like here we've got some G-Skill DDR4. It's great stuff, but anytime you're overclocking the memory, even if it's bought at a frequency that it's advertised at, there's always a little bit of possibility, especially as it goes up, you can still have an actually issue. So this is where you can temper yourself and kind of find out, you know, do you want to be in that situation to have really, really, really high performance where you're, you know, going to have to maybe take a little bit more time to figure out if everything works optimally, even if it's got a single switch option like XMP, or, you know, are you going to go a little bit more conservative and make sure that you're not going to have any issues there. There's tricky parts to it, and like Steve mentioned also, as you push your platform, as you overclock it, there's a balance. The harder you push everything, a little bit more likely that things might go awry. So there's always a balance to how you want to push the system.
Yeah, absolutely, because you're getting more performance, but at the cost of reliability, sometimes. And that's the reason why you do burn-in tests. That's the reason why you run them for so long, to make sure that you know for a fact that they're going to run perfectly without fail. It's also why you don't see servers being overclocked, because they need to be reliable. They cannot fail. Money is on the line. Every second that they're down is money being lost. So.
One comment on
Please.
Going back to the resolution thing. So between like DDR4 and then the newer platforms, you get the more memory channels. If you are wanting to get that new 4K monitor and play your games at 4K, that's where you'll want the additional memory bandwidth to drive those graphics.
Yeah,
So that helps drive your system and chipset.
That gets
choices as well.
to value too. I mean, you know, and that's like, some people are like, why would you ever need X99? Why would you need a DDR4? But not everybody's doing 4K or somebody's doing 3 panels, right? That person might just need 10 extra % to really make sure to get a great level of playability. And somebody else that's just playing a whole bunch of mobile titles is totally okay with their i5 and, you know, a TTX 760 or something.
I think it goes back to that when you're streaming and you're gaming, you're probably video editing as well, maybe for a YouTube channel or something of the like. So having an X99 chipset would be nice, or an X99 system would be nice, because essentially you're going to have a lot more horsepower to just number crunch for all of the times that you're going to need to render those videos. So, all right, guys. So moving along, I think density we haven't really touched on. JJ, did you want to mention about anything about density in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's to each his own, but I mean, for most people you're building, most people are more than safe with an 8 gigabyte memory footprint. The more you put in there, it's never gonna hurt you unless you're overclocking. The higher the densities you go, the more channels you have to deal with. It's a little bit more stress as you push the system as a whole. But beyond that, you know, if you wanna be safe, 8 gigabytes of, you know, DDR3 or DDR4 from a quality memory vendor with a good board, it's gonna probably be in most situations more than sufficient. But we definitely have started to see over the last, you know, year and a half, we started to get some of these games where the memory requirement went up from like, you know, 2 gigs for a lot of titles to like 4 gigs and some even being more than 4 gigs. So I think 8 gigs is a good default buffer now. 4 gigs will probably still get you most of the way, but 8, I would probably err on the side of caution.
I run 16, Bob.
16.
16. So, and the main reasoning I have there is only and it's not because we don't need it. I mean, obviously we can use it. Or it's not that we need it. It's that we could possibly use it. And I like to check from time to time the resources that my system is using. That's a really good way to tell when you're playing a game what you actually need to run that. So if you're already maxing out on 8, maybe it's time for an upgrade. So,
This is a good tip. Easy way to know how much memory you need. On your computer right now, turn it on. Once you get into Windows, do Task Manager, so Control-Alt-Delete, and check the button that says Performance. It will tell you how much actually memory you're using. If you actually see that you're using 6 gigabytes, right alone there, that already tells you, my new computer, I should have at least that. And you probably should do it not only when you start your computer, do it 1 hour later. After you've opened up your 40 tabs in your browser, after you've launched, you know, your Spotify session, after you've launched your YouTube, after you've launched everything, and then you really know how much memory you need.
Yeah, no, absolutely, good point. So power supplies are an important role in a system, all right? It's also going to affect overclocking, but most of the time people are buying a power supply based on the number of GPUs that they're using or the GPU in general and its requirements. Somebody want to start off on PSUs?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things that is a little crazy is a lot of people actually really neglect power supplies when it comes to a system build. The first thing they do is they look at like what the graphics card is going to require, and they basically look because, you know, every graphics card manufacturer tells you it's going to require 550 or 450 or whatnot. And so they just go out, grab whatever one has that number on the box. They don't actually consider things like hard drives and whatnot that's going to go into place. Or even worse, if you're overclocking it, you decide to go overclock it, and you bought the power supply that's going to match your GPU. Next thing you know, if you're overclocking the graphics card, the memory, the CPU, all that starts pulling substantially more amps, which is more wattage. And next thing you know, you're going to be mad because the power supply doesn't support it. But in reality, it's just about making sure you plan appropriately to cover not just that, but any headway for upgrades you might have down the road.
And we just talked about overclocking. You can overclock your graphics card too. I mean, it's a way that you can get increased performance if you're on more of a budget. Those are 2 easy parts of the system that you can take that number that you thought you needed and it can really balloon up. So, you know, a lot of people might have like a 450 watt, 500 watt power supply. You overclocking a CPU and a graphics card, you could easily add another 200 watts. So that's the decision you make. You decide you want to overclock, and if you do, you need to add a little bit more buffer. But there's also aesthetic considerations. There's also cabling considerations. You know, the ThermalTake DPS that we got here, it's a fully modular. I don't know how many of you guys have a fully modular power supply. It's great because you only have so many cables that you need to connect, so you only connect the ones that you want. So those are all little pieces of the puzzle there. But one other thing a lot of people forget is if you Frankenstein your system, how many people here have an upgraded computer? So a system that you've kind of changed over time.
I mean, that's what PCs are for, guys, so that's awesome. You're doing it right, but please tell them what to look out for.
So the tricky thing about that is if you roll components over from one system to another system, that's entirely okay, but some components do degrade a little bit over time. So you have to be careful because even though you bought that power supply maybe 4 years ago with 750 watts, 2 important things. One, it might not be continually now putting out that maximum power at that stage later on in its lifespan. And then another part that you have to consider is CPUs. Intel's done this really, really cool technology with more power states and all kinds of really cool stuff to be more effectively managed. But sometimes the power supply has to be designed to really respond to these things correctly. So this is probably something you'll never think about. I never thought about, is my computer going to work right when I put it to sleep or when I put it to hibernation? You don't actually have to think about that anytime you buy a notebook or when you buy, a prefix computer. Why? Because the vendor has already done all that homework. They put the power supply in there optimally designed for all of that to tie in. So not to mean that every time you get a new board, a new CPU, you might have to change out the power supply, but you might have to do a little bit more homework to find out if it's optimally designed for.
Sure.
But that also lends itself to also you want to make sure you have a good quality. So maybe spending a few extra bucks on the power supply might make sense because having better quality components means it's going to have a better lifespan and better possibility of handling the load you put it under as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually a huge mistake that I've seen, not necessarily specifically in like the PC gaming community overall, but people will tend to skimp on the power supply and then they won't understand the problems that they have down the line as a result.
For sure. And it's the hardest thing.
Yeah,
it's one of those
ghost in the machine kind of things. You don't really understand what's going on.
Beat my head
when you get to it.
over my keyboard kind of frustration because you'll run into stuff that you totally never thought about. Computer sporadically restarts. Computers in the middle of a game and it locks. You get this error message and you don't know what the error message was and everything was working fine for 3 weeks and then all of a sudden it just stopped working, right? Doesn't mean that there aren't, of course, tons of other variables that come into that, but a lot of times when we trace things back and we're doing debugging work and we find out, it all traces back to that.
Hey, who doesn't love a blue screen? Come on.
Should we talk about efficiency for a second?
Well, we can. I mean, basically, when it comes to how much you're going to pull from the wall, how much you're going to pay in your bill, efficiency definitely plays a big role in that. Not to mention, it also ensures the power you're actually going to be delivering, a higher quality power supply, something with really good efficiency, is going to actually give you the stated wattage that you're trying to get. So, if you're trying to if you're trying to overclock, and this is something I really try to pound out there, is when you are overclocking, you literally need every bit of power and every bit of voltage stability possible. So having, first of all, good components, which also leads to good, if you have a good high efficiency power supply, they're made with really good components. So therefore, you're gonna know that's gonna run really well, it's gonna cost you less to operate, and it's also gonna last a lot longer, and you're most likely gonna run into a lot less headaches and a lot less failed components and things like that, or just pulling your hair out trying to figure out what's wrong with your PC.
And for those that don't know, the efficiency works kind of like gold medals on the way up. So bronze, silver, gold, titanium,
Platinum,
and titanium. I got them out of order. Thank you. But yeah, so the higher metal that you're reaching, the more precious the metal, I suppose, the more efficient. So, okay, maybe we should move along to GPUs and GPU performance. I sense a JJ topic coming up.
That's a big topic. That's a really big topic.
It's a tough one. I mean, here's just an example of graphics card. This is probably a bit more high-end than most of you probably have in your system, but we're just referencing this as an example. But this gets back to in the beginning when we talked about resolution. We talked about the game. A lot of that's going to ultimately define the graphics card you're going to need. But one of the really cool things that we're seeing now is that there's additional software pieces that are coming to market, just like I know Intel just recently did something with Raptor where it's great. You now have these profiling technologies where you can have a program that can automatically scan the games that you have in your Steam library and it'll tell you, I know what resolution you're playing at, even if you don't know what HDR, ambient occlusion is, anti-aliasing, androscopic filtering, all these things that make the games look gorgeous, right? You can click a button and it'll automatically adjust it for you. But there's a lot of question marks. Do I buy this card? Do I buy that card? You want to look at cards in two ways, I think. One is going to be always the performance. So what's the class of performance it's going to be offering to you? But also what might be other experience elements. This card, it's got a backplate on it, right? I know when I'm building a system, I want it to look really nice and I want it to look really clean. So when I put it in, I want to have that nice black plate because I don't want to see the PCB and I want to see everything that's on there. I care about that. Maybe somebody else doesn't care about that. Maybe you want really, really cool temperatures, right? So we'll manufacture cards where the temperature performance is very, very low and it's very quiet so you don't hear it when you're gaming, right? But maybe if you're always cranking up your headphones, you don't care if it's loud, so you're maybe okay with that. That's your choice. But there's even newer types of cards where the fans won't even spin when the card's actually running even in game, right? So it's really, really, really quiet. Display out is also another consideration. How many you might be considering how many outputs the card has. If you look at the price of monitors, it's crazy. You can get 24 inches for $110, right? So I'm like, buy 2 monitors always now because it's awesome. And most graphics cards are now going to give you the ability, and heck, even integrated graphics now generally always give you the ability to sometimes have 3 displays simultaneously driven. But, look at that stuff. Look at, how much flexibility your graphics card is going to give you at the displays. And memory is always a big one. People always like, well, how much memory do I need? But this gets back into some games. A lot of you might not even be considering games actually are like programs. There's 32-bit programs and there's 64-bit programs.
Right.
You need 64-bit programs to fully address 4 gigabytes worth of memory. So there's only a couple of those actually out there. They're getting more and more common, but sometimes you could be shooting for a spec on a card that you might not even use because your game doesn't have that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. You guys want to add anything about GPUs? I mean, obviously you can throw more than one in a system, making sure, of course, that you took that into consideration when you first bought your motherboard and did all the research.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, Steve's a big FPS guy. I like RTSs more than first persons.
FPS is better.
But
I'm kidding.
A lot of the game developers do pretty good jobs to optimize first-person shooters for multiple graphics card performance, and that's great. If you're going to play predominantly a game where you can get multiple GPU performance supported on that game, then it's actually a really good option. But if you're like me, I love to play everything from kick-started indie games to the next Battlefield or Call of Duty or Evolve or AAA titles. That's really tricky. I'm going to probably prefer going with the best single card I can get, because half of the games that I might play, the developer may not be able to option and support for a secondary graphics card. But there's nothing wrong with supporting a second card if your games are in that arc. But that comes down to you guys and girls knowing what you want to play. Yeah.
Another thing about backplates I really like is, it's actually saved me a few times with some of your cards, is I work in my PC a lot. As you know, I take it apart all the time. And I've had a few slips of the screwdriver where luckily I didn't chip SMDs off. I've had it happen before, but when it has a backplate, it's actually saved me a few times for a real expensive mistake.
That is a good point there.
So you use the backplate as a shield for your video card.
It's better than replacing the video card.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. Let's talk a little bit about where GPU performance is going. Obviously, it's always increasing, which is fantastic for us because we're gamers, and a lot of games out there are GPU bound, which is awesome. So, JJ, what do you think about in terms of that?
Well, I mean, it's like you said. I mean, the great state right now is a lot of this stuff is evolving. We're seeing continued improvement. You have now the chipset developers are focusing on making direct hardware level optimizations for lower latency that you're seeing in stuff like Oculus and VR related technologies. So that's definitely something to be cognizant of. Yeah. But I think that with other improvements too that we have on the operating system side, we're entering a great space that our hardware is only going to get faster, enabling better and richer experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, think we can move on to storage? Or yeah. You look like you were just about to say something, Matthew, and I don't want to cut you off.
I was going to make one comment.
Please.
So I think it was at GDC this past week, we launched our Broadwell CPU, so it's going to be the first socketed part with the Iris Pro graphics.
Nice.
Which is kind of the next step up in the integrated graphics. And if you do want to have those real small form factors and you can't fit in one of these GPUs because your board's almost that size, it does give you a decent level of graphics performance, and especially like mobile kind of space.
Yeah, no, that's a really good
lower
point.
resolution, so it gives you another option, and that integrated graphics will just continue to get better over time and give you more options.
Excellent. So what Bob's doing right now, if you're watching on the stream or here, I'm not sure if you can see it here, is just attaching where the motherboard should be going. We already pre-installed the CPU and the memory, and I think he's actually going into the cooler now. Is he going into the cooler?
Yeah, he's
fighting with thumb screws.
Fighting thumb screws. I'm sure anybody who's built understands. I always drop thumb screws, actually. I'm a very clumsy person, so.
Oh, that's my quick tip. Yeah,
That I'm a clumsy person?
That's
good tip.
But you can buy yourself a cheap magnetic screw tray.
Yeah.
They cost you like $3. You'd be surprised how much you'll love using that thing, like whenever you build your system. Like you end up leaving screws like all over your desk and stuff. It'll drive you crazy. If you buy just a little tray, put it in there, even if it falls over, they tend to all stay in the tray. And as you guys know, sometimes these screws, they're small, and it's like once it falls on the carpet and the floor, you're like pulling your hair out trying to figure out where that one screw went.
Totally toast.
Just don't put it next to your floppy disks or your monitor or anything.
Yeah. Or your hard disk drive. Speaking of that, can someone grab the SSHD that's inside that system? Since we are moving on to storage, Seagate has provided a solid-state hybrid drive for us. And those who don't actually know, there's several different types of storage, but this is actually a combination of NAND memory, which is what SSDs and USB flash drives use. On top of that, platters, which are what hard disk drives typically use. So the advantage of hard disk drives is that you get a ton more storage without paying a lot of money for them versus SSDs. Obviously, you're going to pay a lot more money to get them, although they are much better performers. So in this particular case, this whole drive is being cached by that 8 gigabyte NAND on there, and essentially allowing it to get sort of SSD performance, but on top of that getting storage that your games are going to actually need. This particular model is a 4 terabyte model. But the bottom line I'm getting at is that storage is an important thing to consider, and I don't know if anybody out there has to uninstall games right now before they reinstall the next new game they just bought. Anybody out there? Anybody?
Well,
Okay.
I think the better one, right? Is how many people here are running an SSD? Well, how many people have a normal hard drive in their systems?
Okay.
Exactly. That's what the statistics show us. So a lot of these, we're entirely spoiled, and we're extremely lucky to be able to work for companies where we have access to the latest and greatest. But most of you guys, girls, are all running on mechanical hard drives. But we're now entering an era where you got price per gigabyte on a solid-state drive. It's becoming very aggressive. You can get really solid capacities, and the experience improvements are so much better. I mean, Windows is going to boot faster. You're going to load your games more quickly. You're going to be able to get maps. You're going to be able to install patches more dynamically. Overall, there's not one experience that gets reduced on. The main one is going to be the capacity limitation, but that's where you can have that balance and you can complement your system by going with an SSD, and then you can also go with a much larger capacity drive. But it's funny, if we circle back to even things like memory, how many of you realize that the amount of memory that you have on your system takes up space on your hard drive right now? You probably had never thought about that. You sir, you rock. But most people don't. If you have like 16 gigabytes of memory, let's say in your computer, that actually takes up 16 gigabytes of space on your drive. If you buy a 120 gigabyte SSD, you just lost 16 gigabytes right off the bat. You didn't do anything. You then add Windows, you lost more space. You then add the fact that Windows takes 10% of the space for its recycle bin by default, you lost even more space. So then all of a sudden you get in, you install your League of Legends, and you install Battlefield, and you're like, I have
no room.
4 gigabytes of space left. What am I supposed to do?
And I have so many Windows updates left.
Oh
they're
yeah,
not gonna
Windows
fit.
Update makes it worse too. Because
What's up?
Windows updates, they make it worse too because they'll stick around too if you don't clear them out. So
it's a tricky situation, but at least we're entering an era where you've got price per gigabyte is coming pretty competitive, and guys like Intel that have other solutions too on the market. It's great because they're tiering them out. If you want the absolute fastest options, boards are now offering you PCI Express solutions. So these are direct plug-in solid-state drives where they don't even connect to a SATA port in the way that a hard drive does. Or you can use these really small form factor M.2 solutions, which are awesome because you can have high-speed storage solutions on little mini ITX boxes, and they make really clean and great installations, but you get insane performance, 2, 3, 4x the performance of what you're going to be looking at on a mechanical hard drive.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add something to storage?
no, I'll just say that Seagate drive in particular though is kind of a best scenario. You get a lot of storage and you get performance in one package without having to configure something. So if you're kind of a novice, that might be a really good option for you.
Yeah, or if you're just on a budget, because it basically keeps all the common use data on the flash.
Excellent.
I think reliability, though, is another point too that we don't want to miss out on. Everything is a question of not if it will fail; it's when it will fail. No vendor wants to say that they're going to produce a product that's going to fail instantaneously or it's going to fail in a very short period of time. But a solid-state drive, while they do have a certain life cycle associated with how much you can use them, I think already the statistics are showing that you generally have a much more reliable solution in the long term. If that's where you're keeping all the stuff that's really important to you. So I think complementing the two, having a great large mechanical drive and a solid state drive is the way that I would go about building a system, but definitely a lot of options out there when it comes to storage.
So one thing, I made a mistake earlier, it's not 4 terabytes, 2 terabyte. Also, can we throw this inside the chassis? And I think we should move along to Wi-Fi as another option for people to have connectivity. Now, my personal opinion, I would much more prefer to have an Ethernet connection for gaming because it's more stable. The throughput, not as big of an issue, but its stability and the lack of issue of dropping connectivity. But Wi-Fi is important though, because a lot of people have gaming systems that might be, in their living rooms, and they don't want to run Ethernet cables throughout their entire house or drill holes in walls or anything. So it's a good consideration, I'd say, right, guys?
Or they might rent an apartment and they can't drill holes in walls.
That's another good point. Yeah.
Dorm room.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is that gets back to little details on whether or not you're thinking about these things when you're a builder, right? So when you're putting together a system, are you consciously thinking, does the motherboard come integrated wise? There's tons of times I'm on the community out there, and I'm working with people, and they ask me, hey, can I get your feedback on this build that I picked out? They picked this whole board, and they went for a cheaper board, and then they spent $25 to add like this Wi-Fi card in there, and I'm like, well, you could have spent the $25, got this board. It already comes with actually even a better class of wireless controller on there. You got a better spec board in the first place instead of playing this game where you thought, I'm gonna save money here, and then I'm gonna save money here, and then I'm gonna put together. But be conscious of that whole situation, and there's also funny things that play out in terms of also the whole experience. Steve makes a good point that you do have potentially more inconsistency when you consider wireless as a form of connectivity, but you want to balance that out. So if you're buying a newer board that's got like dual band N, or it's got 811 AC that's on there, these connections can offer 2 times, 3 times the performance of a standard Ethernet cable, but you need to have a router that also provides you that level of performance. So if you're using the router that came to you from from Comcast or whoever it might be your provider, you might need to upgrade that too to get the best experience. And we get people like that too. They'll buy everything and they're like, oh dude, this sucks. Why is the speed so slow, right? And it's like, this is supposed to have new Wi-Fi and it's supposed to be great, but you're using with this Wi-Fi router that you got like from 6 years ago. So there's always that bottleneck. So you have to kind of balance out those aspects of the connections.
Absolutely. Can we touch on audio just real quick?
Sure.
So obviously gaming, audio, really important. I've always felt that way. You can usually tell the difference between different sound cards. I'm right now just using onboard audio because it's grown so much that I don't feel the need to buy a separate expansion card for that.
But you also got a board that already has a higher caliber of audio on it than what you would traditionally have.
This is true. You already know which motherboard I'm talking about. That's why you know it's an ASUS motherboard. Anyways,
So I use onboard, but I have some friends who feel very strongly against using onboard.
Okay.
It's a personal preference.
Are they using DACs or what?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's another way you can get your audio too. It's externally, and that's like audio files, just hardcore. Want the best. There's probably a guy right there doing audio that knows what I'm talking about. Yep, pointing at it.
But it actually, I think it really depends. This gets back to experience. How many of you ever plugged in your headphones inside a chassis and ever heard humming or ever heard static, right? Or ever start to move your browser around and you hear like little fluttering sounds?
That's not in my head.
And those can be annoying traits. So these are all kind of things, same thing. You have to be the judge for how much value it has for you. Do you decide you want to spend an extra $20 on putting in a card where you could eliminate a large amount of those experiences and have better clarity for your music, your movies, and your games? Or even some of our motherboard solutions, take for instance, might give you even things that you might not even realize. We have a feature where we can real-time show you where sounds are coming from on a map. So for me, I don't play as much online competitively as I'd like, and so when I jump into a map, I'm probably getting owned, right? So I'm coming back from some corner, somebody's shooting at me, and they're gonna flank me, and now what I can do is if I want to, I could pop that up, and I could see that they're shooting at me from the right side, so if I want, now I can pull back, and I can go on the other side, and I could get them potentially. That's a total value proposition. If that's not interesting to you or there's no value to you, of course, don't spend the money on it, right? But it's not always as clear cut. I love really nice headphones. I love listening to music in a great way, so I want to spend a little bit more. So a lot of these things are going to be really dependent on your experience. A lot of what we've talked about is also respecting each other as us as builders and as a community. Just like we have differences in opinion in the games that we want to play, respect each other's kind of differences where you're in the community. The choice that you might make might be entirely okay for you, but for somebody else it could be entirely different.
So I'm going to touch on operating systems just really quickly, and then if anybody has some questions, you guys can start lining up, because I'd definitely like to get this panel to answer some of those questions. So moving along to operating systems, fair enough, almost everybody in this room is probably using Windows, or probably SteamOS, hopefully, maybe anybody? Anybody doing Linux? Sweet. All right. Right on. Okay. So I do enjoy. I'm an avid Steam user, and I love to I love to buy my games on the Steam sales and go crazy. I'm a little bit of a hoarder in that. But, but in terms of Windows being kind of the go-to, who wants to add something about gaming on Windows? I mean, it's pretty obvious it's the go-to for most.
Well, I think one thing that's important is a lot of us can get caught into kind of creature comforts on what we want, and a good poll would be is how many people are still running Windows 7 here? Interesting. Okay, so one thing a lot of us might get stuck in aspects of the UI, so like start screen versus not start screen and all kinds of stuff like that. But some really interesting things to remember is advancements that happen in the operating system complement advances in the hardware. So an example might be USB performance. If you have like a modern USB 3 motherboard, your performance could increase by a factor of 2 to 4x alone in just shifting the operating system. Probably none of you even thought about, I didn't know that my USB port could be faster just by running Windows 8 versus running Windows 7. It is. Your system can actually resume and shut down faster under the operating system.
That's for sure.
Even future things, right? DirectX 12 will be limited only new OS platforms. So there's a lot of benefits, and I definitely, for me, it's a clear-cut option. I would never go back to an older operating system just because the experience that I feel that I'm going to have from a current operating system is going to be so much better. You know, it's a PC. At the end of the day, too, you can hack and modify and do a lot of stuff to make it fit the kind of look and feel that you want, which I think is one of the great things about the Windows platform. But definitely realize there's a lot of other benefits you get purely out of the UI. A lot of us fixate, oh, it looks different, but there's a lot of stuff that's under the hood that you'd be surprised that really gives you a better experience.
Awesome. Anything else, guys?
I think he pretty much said most of it.
Yeah.
I mean, well, the only thing I'd add, you know, like JJ said, under the hood, Windows 8, you get the option of running Hyper-V, and I don't know if anybody runs servers of any type in their house, right? Okay, so with Hyper-V, you can run your virtual machines basically as close to the metal as you can get, and you can even use, you know, you don't have to dedicate a set amount of RAM to your machine. It'll kind of, you can give it a limit and it'll only use as much as it needs. So I run Hyper-V quite a bit.
Fantastic. All right, let's take our first question. Can we start with you first?
Hello, hi.
Hi.
I'd like to know a little bit more about the difference between CPUs and GPUs.
Oh.
They're both processing units, but kind of what's the difference in the programming world? Sometimes we hear about people saying like, oh, now I'm running my program on a GPU, it's so much better and faster. If GPUs are so much better and faster, why are we not using them for all our processing?
Someone actually gave me a good analogy for it, an Intel thing. So it's different things for different workloads, and so if you have say you had a large cart that you need to move, and you consider GPUs, you have hundreds of little GPUs in your graphics card, or you'd have 8 cores in your Intel processor. And if you thought of your 8 cores as Clydesdales and your GPUs as little ants, your Clydesdales are going to move that beer cart a lot better than the ants would. But if you had a bag of rice and you dumped it on the ground, those ants are going to get all those little pieces of rice and put them in order a lot faster than a Clydesdale is going to be able to move them. So it's just a matter of what the code is set up for and then what the workload is, and it's just different things for different workloads.
Yeah, so GPUs more for parallel processing, right? So they can handle tons of operations.
They can do lots of little things very, very quickly.
Right.
And some big, heavy tasks, the CPU can do better.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too comes down to fundamentally, I mean, it's a question of convention, right? The development and the focus has been put continually refining and maximizing the architecture that's been out there continually, and that's where you're seeing the performance. But I think we're also seeing a great complementary experience, right? So if you jump into, let's say, something like a content creation application, it's fantastic to have a high core count, high cache, very capable CPU that has dynamic frequencies that these type of programs love, but they can still get additional benefits through acceleration, you know, through filtering and things like that that you might do on your GPU. So sometimes there seems to be like a competitive standpoint, but a lot of times the reality of what it really is it's trying to find the synergy that exists between these two devices and whether or not the application you're using can leverage it. Now, I think the bigger question comes into play is whether or not you find these gray areas where development might have been done on the graphics card and also done on the CPU side and how that might play out. And that gets more complicated because even then, it's not always clear cut. We've seen that quality from encoding on the CPUs generally is higher quality than sometimes some of the acceleration encoding that we see happening on the graphics card side. So it's not even always clear cut even when they're the same space.
So I can see several people are lining up for questions, and we are running out of time, but I'll take a question from this side and let you guys all know that we'll stick around and answer your questions. All right? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have a question for the less tech-savvy users with their GPUs. So you're mentioning to look at the resolutions. In terms of specifications on the different GPU SKUs, whether it's AMD or NVIDIA, what should a user be looking at to determine proper card for situations? So should they be looking at bus speeds? Should they be looking at video memory? Should they be looking at core clock speeds?
That's a really good question. I think that overall the default is probably going to be and it's tricky because some vendors have different ways that they interpret the information, but it's going to probably be your shaders. Your shaders or your cores that they want to reference it, they have different ways that they want to describe them. But that overall is going to be an indicator similar to kind of like if we looked at an Intel chip, you know, the number of cores, how much cache, what's the frequency that it operates at. Frequency is going to be an indicator, and then the number of shaders is going to give you. The more that has in play, then of course the better performance you're going to have. The tricky part to that is that there's a lot of naming conventions that these GPU manufacturers do, and they change, and sometimes from one generation to another, they can be very similar, they can be very different. And I think this is where Steve made a good point. Baseline recommendations aren't always 100% accurate, but they can be used pretty good as a barometer. So if you know you're jumping in your game, what is the minimum requirement the developer is putting and saying, hey, it says you need a GTX 760 at a minimum, but we recommend a GTX 770, or we recommend a GTX 780, and use that kind of as your framework, and then from there you can keep moving up from there as far as that goes. Yeah. Awesome. On the memory side, I wouldn't worry so much about the memory because memory gets overemphasized to some degree. It's very, very important, but I'll give you an example. If we put like 6 gigabytes of memory, which is right now only found like on maybe like $1,000 graphics card, and I were to put that on a $150 graphics card, the $150 graphics card doesn't have the performance to leverage that 6 gigabytes of memory, so it's a moot point. In most situations, realistically, for most gamers, 2 gigabytes of memory is going to do you very, very comfortably, give you a good quality experience. If you have 3 to 4 gigabytes, you're only going to get a better experience, but you're probably going into a much higher class of image quality. So you're playing at not 1080p resolutions, but plus HD resolutions, or going into 4K, and definitely you want then more memory, but you're going to need an equally capable graphics card, not just the memory. And the graphics core is going to play just as much as importance there too.
Matthew, did you have one quick thing to add?
I'm gonna say the same thing. If you're someone that does like high texture packs for Skyrim or GTA or something, you're gonna want to get the cards with the more video memory to.
Excellent. So guys, please stick around. We'll answer your questions as soon as we're done here, but I just want to give some closing thoughts for each member. JJ, you want to start?
No, I mean, I'm just thankful you guys came out. I love the open platform that is PC DIY. I love the fact that PC gaming is the absolute best experience out there for gamers, and I love that all you guys are interested in some way, whether it's small or whether it's big. I thank you guys for just being interested and wanting to support the platform and the entire experience that's out there. And if you definitely have any other questions, feel free to always find us through the mechanisms that are available to us, and I'm more than happy to give you guys whatever support we can.
Awesome. Matthew?
Yeah, thank you also for coming up. I'm in the Intel booth all day tomorrow. We have a mix of systems that are custom built by like Origin PC or Main Gear, those guys in the booth, but then the 4 Twitch streaming booths we have are systems I built myself, so if you have questions about building systems, you can come talk to me about that. Yeah, and
awesome. Shannon?
Yeah, I'll do the same thing. I mean, thank you guys, for coming out. It's really cool to get a chance to, hang out with a lot of gamers, kind of show off some of the cool stuff we get to make for you. And I mean, really, I'm over in the Newegg booth with Steve and them, so if you guys have any questions or anything you were going to ask that maybe we didn't have time to cover, please feel free to stop by and talk to us, because we would really love a chance to, be able to help you guys come up with what your next PC might be.
Cool. Bob?
All right. No, I'd just like to say thank you, and hopefully you guys can take away some thoughts here so you can do some informed research. If you have any questions, feel free to ask my community here. We got a lot of helpful people. You can follow me on Twitter at bpost34 or kbmod at kbmodgaming.
Awesome. And you're going to get a 5th thank you from me, everybody. So thank you once again for showing up. We really appreciate it. On the stream, thank you guys for watching. Check out GameCrate.com as well as Newegg.com because we want to help you guys get the best gaming equipment we can and advise you. So take care, everybody.
Hi everybody, I'm Nick from GameCrate.
And I'm Steve with Newegg TV, and today we're going to talk to you about the ASUS ROG G751 gaming laptop. The ASUS ROG G751 series of gaming laptops are designed for serious gamers who want to have the convenience of laptop portability without compromises. Utilizing the powerful combination of the Intel Core i7-4710 or 4860 HQ processor and either the NVIDIA 970 or 980M GPU, games will move flawlessly across the 17.3-inch FHD IPS display. The red LED, fully backlit, one-piece keyboard has long throw keys for instant response. Quick access game keys and programmable macro keys keep all of your essential commands in easy reach. Around the outside, you'll find a generous assortment of connection ports, including USB 3, Thunderbolt, and supporting ports for connecting multiple monitors. And across the back, the aggressive cooling fin array has been accented in red, and behind it is a dual fan and copper heatsink cooler to maintain performance and stability.
Awesome. And if you like what you saw there, you can pick it up at the Newegg PAX booth number 3116.
Or Newegg.com.